The renovation site smelled of sawdust and wet stone. Olivia Bennett, the young CEO of Crosswell Development, stopped walking when she saw one of her carpenters sitting on a stack of timber, eating from a lunchbox, smiling into his phone as he spoke softly to someone he loved. Something in that easy warmth undid her. Almost to herself, she murmured, "I wish I had a family like yours." She thought no one heard, but the man looked up, met her eyes, and smiled. "My kid needs a mom." One joke changed everything. The historic Halstead station had been closed for the better part of a decade before Crosswell Development bought the rights to restore it. Its iron ribs still held the shape of an older, grander city, and now the building lived again under scaffolding and tops filled with the noise of drills and the low talk of men who worked with their hands. Among them, Jacob Sullivan moved with the quiet economy of someone who had learned to make himself useful in any room. He was a carpenter now, in his middle 30s, though the way he read a beam or tested a joint suggested he had once known the building's bones far more intimately than the job required. He had come to this work by way of loss. Years earlier, his wife had fallen ill, and when the illness finally took her, it left behind a silence he chose to fill with sawdust and steady hours instead of ambition. He had walked away from a career that once demanded everything of him, and he did not miss it. What he wanted now was simpler and harder to hold on to. And every day at noon, he stepped away from the noise to reach for it. The lunch break was the part of the day Jacob protected. He would find a corner away from the crew, sit on whatever surface was free, and call home. The voice that answered on the other end of the line changed his whole face. He laughed more easily, then spoke more gently. And for those few minutes, the renovation site and everything it demanded of him fell away. Whatever weight he carried the rest of the day, it lifted when he held that phone. Olivia Bennett had not planned to notice him. She ran Crosswell Development from a glass office 30 floors above the streets, and she had come to Halstead Station only to review the schedule and confirm that the money she had committed was turning into progress. She could show a board that never stopped watching her. She was young for the chair she held sharp in a way people admired and rarely warmed to, and she had built her days into a fortress of meetings and figures where nothing personal could reach her. She had not always been alone, but she had been alone long enough that she no longer remembered it as a wound. Her parents had died when she was small, and she had been raised by guardians and trusts and the careful, distant attention of people paid to manage her life. She grew up in boardrooms before she understood what they were learned early, that affection was a currency others spent on their own children, and taught herself to want only the things she could earn. A home, in the full and ordinary sense of the word, was not something she had ever possessed. That was why the man on the timber stack stopped her. She had walked the length of the concourse checking sight lines and budgets, and then she saw him there, laughing into his phone, with a warmth so unguarded it seemed to belong to a different world than hers. She did not know the words he was saying. She only knew the way he looked while saying them, and something in her chest tightened at the sight of a happiness so complete that it needed no audience. The sentence left her before she could stop it. "I wish I had a family like yours." She said it low, meant only for herself, a confession she assumed the machinery around them would swallow. She was already turning to go when his voice caught her light and unbothered, offering back what he surely meant as nothing more than a kind joke. "My kid needs a mom." He smiled when he said it, the way a man smiles to soften an awkward moment, and then he went back to his call as though nothing had passed between them. Olivia walked away too quickly. She told herself it was a stranger's remark, the sort of thing men on job sites said without weight, and that a woman in her position had no business turning it over in her mind. She rode the elevator up to her office, opened the reports waiting for her, and read the same paragraph 4 times without keeping a word of it. The image would not leave her that easy laugh, and the phone held close, and the quiet certainty in his answer that a family was simply a thing a person could have. For days afterward, she found reasons to be at the station. There was always a schedule to verify a contract or to press a line item that justified a walk through the concourse near the hour when the crew broke for lunch. She was good enough at her own excuses that she almost believed them, and no one on the board would have questioned a CEO who took a personal interest in her most visible project. But she knew where her feet carried her, and she knew what she was hoping to see. Jacob noticed her before he understood what he was noticing. The CEO of the company did not usually linger, and yet the polished woman in the tailored coat kept appearing at the edge of his afternoons, always with a folder in her hand, and always somewhere he happened to be. He assumed at first that she was checking his work, and he made sure the work would hold. When she finally spoke to him again, it was about the timber, and he answered about the timber, and neither of them said anything about the sentence still hanging in the air between them. Their conversations grew, though, in the careful way of two people who have agreed without words to pretend nothing is happening. She asked about the restoration, and he told her more than the schedule ever could, why the old joints had lasted a century, and how he intended to make the new ones last as long. She listened the way people listen when they are not really thinking about the subject, and he answered the way men do when they are glad to be asked. The folder in her hand grew less convincing with each visit. His household came to know of her before Olivia knew it herself. During the noon calls, Jacob would sometimes mention in passing the woman who ran the whole project, and the questions that came back were frank and unfiltered. In time, the phone in his hand began to include her, a curiosity from the other end, asking whether the pretty CEO was there today, and Jacob would laugh and say she was busy running things far above the likes of them. He said it to keep matters clear, mostly for his own sake, because Jacob understood their separate worlds better than she did. He had once lived nearer to the one Olivia moved in, and he remembered exactly how far it sat from a man on a timber stack with sawdust on his sleeves. Whatever passed between them at noon, he filed the whole thing under kindness and coincidence, a wealthy woman being briefly human with the help. The joke he had made was only a joke. He told himself that firmly, the way a man does when part of him has begun to suspect otherwise. Then came the afternoon that changed the shape of everything, and it began with a phone that would not stop ringing. Jacob was midway through fitting a beam when the call came, and the crew nearby watched his face empty of its usual steadiness. There was a fever at home, high and sudden, and the person he had left in charge had no car, and Jacob was on the far side of the city, with no way to get there fast. He stood with the phone against his ear, and the helpless arithmetic of a working father running behind his eyes. Olivia was on the concourse when it happened. She had come down under the pretense of the schedule again, and she saw the change in him from across the floor, before she heard a word of the reason. She crossed to him without deciding to, and when he told her short and tight what was wrong, she did not offer sympathy or excuses. She said only that her car was outside, and that he should follow her, and she was already moving toward the doors before he could think of a reason to refuse. The drive across the city passed, with almost nothing said. Jacob sat forward in the seat, his hands pressed together, giving directions in a low voice. And Olivia drove faster than she should have, and didn't care. She had a driver on staff, and a schedule that did not permit this, and she had left both behind on the concourse without a second thought. She kept her eyes on the road, and stole glances at the man beside her, at the fear he was trying to hold still, and something in her steadied to be useful to it. They reached the house, and then the hospital, and Olivia stayed. She could have left him at the doors with a word about calling if he needed anything, and it would have been generous by the standards of her world. Instead, she parked and walked in and sat in the waiting area, while the fever was seen to holding a paper cup of coffee she never drank. She had built a life in which no one required her presence, only her decisions, and she found she did not want to leave. Later, when the danger had passed and the evening had gone quiet, Jacob thanked her in the plain, exhausted way of a man who has run out of pride to spend. She told him it was nothing, and he told her it wasn't nothing. And for a moment,